Marcus, welcome to Philly.
Morning. Morning. Morning.
So I have to tell you,
Yes.
I don't think you know this, but 2 decades ago, I was one of the first participants in one of your surveys.
Are you serious?
Yeah, when I was an undergrad.
Did we have to pay you for that? Are we still, is it a check in the mail sort of a thing?
No, I had to do it for course credit. But I feel like now it's only fair to turn the tables. And so I'm going to ask you to participate in a little bit of research today. So I prepared a little survey. First question is, Marcus, do you have a best friend at work?
I do. Scale of 1 to 5. 5.
Okay.
Is that the right answer?
Yes. Second, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day?
You know, it varies, but I gotta say most days I do. Certainly today. I mean, this has been a strong day for me already.
Well, we'll see, right?
Yes. It could go downhill. These things go up and down. These are states, not traits, you know, Adam. So these.
Rightfully so. And then I'm sure you're tired of these questions by now, but tell us, what are your top strengths?
Well, in terms of StrengthsFinder, originally, I have futuristic, past, context, we call it now. So I missed the present, but that's fine. Ideation, intellection. So I really want to be completely by myself right now, but it's fine. And individualization. So I like the fact that people are different. And in terms of the standout assessment, which is more of a situational judgment test than a self-evaluation, creator stimulator. So I like thinking, pushing, which I guess is a corollary to ideation, pushing through to the core. And then I like sharing it. I mean, I do actually like having parts of my life that are this. Yeah. So those are the right strengths. If you keep working and taking the assessments, you'll find out if you can have the right one. I'm joking. Clearly. Yeah, so those are mine.
So I'm going to try to do some stimulating today.
Yes.
I want to just start by asking you a little bit about why did you spearhead this Strang Space movement? Because at some level, for me, this was the early days of people analytics. Right? I didn't see many companies trying to measure engagement, and you came along and said, look, we can actually crunch the numbers on these what seemed like really fluffy concepts, and we can figure out how to predict that and how to increase it.
Yeah.
What led you to that, and then how did you go from there to saying we should be more strengths focused than we are?
Well, my grandfather was in HR. He was at London School of Economics right after the Second World War, and his focus was demobilization. My father was in HR as well, and his focus was on collective bargaining. If you think about the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, particularly in the UK, and in Europe, there was a lot of management-worker conflict. But as part of that, he became the CHRO of Allied Breweries. And his job there was, they had 7,000 pubs. And so his job there was to try to figure out how do you, given that the beer is the beer is the beer is the beer is the beer, whatever pub you're in, one of the differentiators is the quality of the pub manager. And so he began a search to try and find what are the most reliable ways, and in the end, ways that have some sort of criterion-related validity to them to measure the talents of a pub manager. And of course, inevitably, he found a company in Lincoln, Nebraska, who knew nothing about pubs, but they came at it with a really clear sort of white paper frame of mind and started doing concurrent validity studies to try and identify the talents of pub managers as compared to the contrast groups. And Don Clifton, Dr. Donald O. Clifton, who became the chairman of Gallup, spearheaded that work. And so when I was 16, when everyone else was on their vacation going to the south of France or wherever we went to Lincoln, Nebraska. Which for me was super glamorous and weird and flat and huge. And then I went back every year while I was at university as well. And of course, Don's focus at that time was on how do you reliably measure things that you can't count but can be measured. Initially on pre-employment selection assessments, moving into then how do you measure engagement? How do you measure engagement? What the heck is engagement anyway? How do you do it in a way that's reliable, where you can begin to understand relationships between that metric at this time and then something else that you're interested in, like lost work days or accidents on the job or whatever. So we did all that, and then obviously some of the people that we focused on were good managers. And when you interview good managers and ask open-ended questions, you do actually find, although they're different, they have some of the same sorts of responses. And two of them just have always stuck with me as we try to build instruments to measure managerial talent. The first question was, how closely should people be supervised? Mm-hmm. And their answer was Although every manager was different, if you look at the study group versus the contrast group, everyone in the study group had the same sort of answer, and they all said, some of them said it shortly, some of them said it in whole paragraphs, but they all said the same thing, which you might now be thinking of, well, what's the right answer to how closely should people be supervised? And of course, the best managers all said, it depends. And then the next question was, what is the best way to motivate somebody? And they all instinctively said, it depends.
They didn't say beer?
They didn't, well, well, some of them said beer. But what that begins to help you understand is the best managers individualize, and therefore what they're really doing is looking for where a particular person has a source of strength, and then they're leveraging it intelligently. They don't fight against who you are and try to remediate you and fix you because you're not broken. They're pretty, in a sense, pretty pragmatic, going, who's the uniqueness of you versus you versus you, and how do we get the most from you? From that came an inevitable way of saying, well, what do the best managers have in common? They focus on people's strengths and manage around their weaknesses, which is sort of like a duh when you say it. But at the time, there was a lot of remedial deficit thinking, well-intended, but it was super different from what you actually heard from real people talking about how they get the best from themselves or their people. And then, obviously, from that came, well, we better go out there with this work, which began as a research paper and ended up being First Break All the Rules.
Yeah. And so do you believe that we have a hard time even knowing what our strengths are?
Yeah, it's one of the tricky things about a strength, right? First of all, we think that a strength is what you're good at and a weakness is what you're bad at, which is not, that's not the right definition, obviously, because you're quite good at some things that you hate. We all are. We're all quite good at some stuff that if we never had to do it again, it would be a day too soon. So we have our definition wrong. If you define a strength as an activity that strengthens you, if you define a weakness as an activity that drains you or drags you down, even if you're good at it, then all of a sudden you actually are the best. You are the best source of truth about your own strengths, because you know, like if I focus on the particular activities that strengthen me, and one of them turns out to be finding patterns in data, then you, as my teammates or my boss, could go, well, you got to find a better way of showing the pattern, or you got to find a better way to explain it to people so it makes, or you better find patterns that are useful. Like you could say all those things, but what you can't say is, no, you don't. You don't love that at all, because I'm the truth teller about what strengthens me. You can be the truth teller about how to navigate it into something useful, but I'm actually the source of truth about my own strengths if we define strengths in that way. Sometimes, of course, we're so close to our own stuff, like the New Yorker who can't hear the sirens or the horns anymore because you're so close to it, you don't hear it. So yes, sometimes it's helpful with assessments, for example. I'm a big fan, as you would imagine, of talent assessments that are reliably, incredibly made. They can be incredibly helpful in helping you step back a wee bit and giving you a new nomenclature for describing some of the best of yourself.
So one of the things I worry about is I've worked with a lot of organizations that have embraced the strengths-based movement, right? We've seen McKinsey and Facebook and lots of others say, you know, we already have lots of critical feedback, and we need to really encourage our managers to make sure that people are told what they're good at and encouraged to do the things that they really do feel strengthen them.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes a side effect of that is people overuse their strengths in situations where they're not appropriate. And so, you know, I think about, there's some research by Rob Kaiser and his colleagues which show that actually one of the ways that you can have a weakness is to overdo a strength, right? So I have a colleague who's extremely charismatic, and that strength becomes a crutch, and he never prepares for giving talks on stage. And then the talks are really rambling, and you know, they go way over time, and that feels like a strength overused, right? He feels strengthened by relying on that charisma, but it hurts his performance. What do you think of that?
I would disagree. I would strongly disagree.
I thought you were only going to give me positive feedback here. Come on, Marcus, come on.
I'm just giving you my reaction. Who knows what the feedback would be, but a strength is just an activity that strengthens you. It's not good or bad. It's morally neutral. You can use it for ill, and you can use it for good. If somebody is strengthened by the fact that there's 50 people that are watching them and they get energy from this, and they then ramble on because they haven't prepared, then the appropriate reaction is for you all in the room to go, we're all like this, in which case we can come back to this person, this friend of yours, and go, look, they fell asleep.
Yeah.
They're super grumpy with you rambling on. That doesn't mean you've got too much charisma. You can never have too much of a strength. You can only use it poorly. What we're talking about here is intelligence. You can use your strengths unintelligently, There are many leaders on the world stage today, even perhaps some leaders here in the US, who have got a lot of certain strengths and use them unintelligently, in the sense that they don't get the outcome that we want them to have. That's not too much. It's interesting. If you think you can ever have too much of a strength, your coaching then sounds like this. Be less of yourself, Adam. Turn yourself down. And for you, you're like, how do I metabolize that? Whereas if I say to you, listen, you've got a great strength in, maybe you're super assertive.
Yep.
Stop pissing people off and start using that to persuade them to do something that they didn't intend to do. And then you lean in and go, how do I do that? Now all of a sudden I'm like, well, I don't know. Here's what I would do. But I tell you what you might try.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden it's you're leaning into yourself, not to quote Cheryl, but like you're leaning into yourself. And that just feels better than me going, turn yourself down, turn it down. You're at 11, turn it to 6. And you're like, I can't, like, oh, you're too empathetic. No, you can never be too, like if you've got empathy, you're empathetic. Our challenge with you then is how do you leverage that intelligently to create the outcomes that you want? You can't be crying all over people all the time, but that doesn't mean you have too much empathy. It means we've got to help you channel that productively. It's a different, it leads to different conversations.
Great. So I think I'm on board. Help me apply this in my own life. So apparently when I took the Strengths Finder, I took an early version of it. And one of my strengths was that I was logical and data-driven, and I think you have a term for that now.
Logical and data-driven? Annoying.
Thank you. You are really all about strengths.
Yes,
I was hoping it would be true.
I don't actually do this myself. Are you kidding? Well, analytical would be one.
Yeah, and I think there was a little bit of maybe it was woo winning over others sort of loaded with that as well.
Yeah.
And
Command.
So I sort of took this as feedback and said, okay, this is probably going to be a useful skill as a teacher. And a few years ago, I had a student who called me for some career advice. And I gave her a bunch of advice. And at the end of the conversation, she said, "You're a logic bully."
You're a logic bully?
Yeah, and I was like, what does that mean? And she said, well, you just overwhelm me with rational arguments, and I don't agree with them, but I can't fight back. And I said, good. That's my job, right? And she said, well, no, because I actually want to own my decision.
Ooh.
And I realized that I had sort of failed in at least my vision of my role as a mentor or an advisor, right? Which is I wanted to help her see how I would think through a situation, but not tell her what I thought the right answer is. And so I'm trying now not to, quote unquote, overuse that strength and not be a logic bully, but still introduce her to some logic. How should I think about that?
So that's super interesting. Obviously, every strength has a dark side, if you will. I mean, you say to someone, I just have incredibly high standards. And those are the high standards that I have, and somebody else behind your back is going, stupid perfectionist, just anal. You know, like I'm super assertive. No, aggressive. Like, every strength has that kind of dark side. You're a logic bully. I hadn't thought of that. By the way, that's a great word combination. Logic bully. But weirdly, if I was coaching you, I'd go, people follow you because of that. Don't turn that down. Turn that up, because people follow you because of that. So turn it up, step into it, and
bully you more.
Well, more like learn how you can leave space for people to model what you're doing as they make their own decisions. Is it true that in general, people tend to want to own their own decisions because their learning is emergent? Yes. Yeah. Is it therefore true that you telling them exactly what to do removes from them the opportunity to learn? Yes. Are you also a teacher? Yes. So therefore, if you want people to learn, you've got to use your logic bulliness to help them step into their own intelligence. Like and you would find lots of tricks and techniques to do that. But I would say to you, I bet one of the reasons why people are drawn to you is because you are so purely you, and hopefully over time, intelligently you, and we know you're not perfect. There's a whole bunch of qualities that teachers and professors and so forth have that you don't have. But these ones that you do have are really distinctive and elevating for people. And my challenge in helping you grow would be to say, do you know what those are? Do you feel able to channel them in a way that helps and benefits your students? And what are the ways in which it has worked for you? That's why that whole feedback piece in the HBR was like, I want to help you uncover what works. For me to say, stop bullying people, that's just a weird thing to say to you. Because you're like, I didn't think I was bullying. You almost immediately, you're out of the conversation.
I am.
And sort of intellectually, you're doing this. He's an idiot. He thinks I'm bullying them. I'm not bullying. Like, you go there. So instead, we would step into this and go, what outcome do you want? Oh, learning. Well, given who you are and how people gravitate to you, how do you help them learn? That's a super unique and interesting question for you to grapple with for your entire freaking career.
It is. So that's a great segue to your new book, 9 Lies About Work, which is so provocative and so interesting. And one of the lies that you take on, I'm not sure I agree that it's a lie. I want to talk about that. But you say it's a lie that we need feedback at all, which is sort of blasphemy, right, for a group of people who have lived their lives saying the only way I get better is to get feedback. So tell us what you mean.
Well, this is a people analytics conference, right? So we have to know from an analytics standpoint when and how do people get better. And certainly we got to look at people's behavior in the real world. It is an irony that many companies will point to people's need for feedback by saying, gosh, those millennials, they love that feedback. We need more feedback because they can't wait for the once-a-year performance review. They've got to have it all the time, all the feedback. And yet, over the last 3 years, we've seen the growth of a social network whose very appeal is the fact that there's no feedback on it at all. And by the way, for those of you who wanted to start a social network, it's hard. The network effect is really strong. So Path and Ning, even the relaunch of MySpace, I mean, none of that worked. It's tricky but Snapchat went bang. And Snapchat went bang. I don't mean it's making money. I don't know how its business is. But people are drawn to it because there's no feedback in it at all. What people want isn't feedback. In fact, my daughter's huge on Instagram. And feedback for her is they're the haters, right? They're the haters. What you want when you go on Snapchat, and now as Instagram tries to become more like Snapchat, you want an audience. You want attention. So what human beings want from one another, unquestionably, we develop in response to another human being. We do. I mean, if you want to kill us, ignore us. The worst thing of all, of course, is have no friends. Be lonely. Your health will suffer. Your state of mind will suffer. Humans like to be around other humans, no question. But then that begs the question, what do you want from that human? The underlying assumption of feedback, the two big challenges with it are, number one, and by the way, to your point, and you and I have had conversations about this, if I get a fact wrong, you tell me the fact. If I submit a peer-reviewed journal to you and you go, this is not, then you should be telling me that, absolutely. So facts.
I will, don't worry.
Steps, too. If you missed a step, if there's a step for giving a safe injection, I missed step 3, you're going to go, don't miss step 3. But as we all know, excellence in any job is not really a function of getting the facts right or the steps right. There's a whole bunch more. You can get the facts right and the steps right and still be really, really average. So in terms of excellence, excellence is a manifestation of each individual being excellent. You can't define comedy by saying, in general, comedians are like this, and list a bunch of competencies, which we then try to measure through a 360. No, I mean, you've got Eddie Murphy, you've got Jerry Seinfeld, you've got Sarah Silverman, you've got Chris Rock. I mean, they're all weirdly different. The only thing a comedian has in common is that people are laughing. You can't separate the comedian from the comedy, right? So in the context of feedback, then, me telling you who you are, me telling you I'm going to rate you on strategic thinking. No, I'm not. Who made me the authority on strategic thinking? The only thing I'm a source of truth on, and this is true as we think about the tools that we build, the analytics tools that we build, I'm a source of truth about my reaction only, which is why, I mean, my kids had a surgery for deviated septum last November. My son had it first, and then my daughter had it the next day. The day after the surgery, the same doctor, same surgery, same everything. Doctor comes in, and of course, as you know, the question that he asked them both the day after the surgery is, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 high, how's your pain? Rate your pain. My son said 5. My daughter said 3. I was in the room both times. Upon hearing that, the doctor did not say to my son, that's not a 5. I know 5s. I've done this surgery 4,000 times. That's not a 5. We've done a consensus meeting and a calibration session for the other patients down the hall. Your 5 is actually a 3. Besides, we've run out of 5s. We've run out of 5s. We're done with 5s. Haven't got any more. I'd give you a 4, but we've actually, like we didn't. He just went, you got a 5, and my daughter got a 3. And all he knew, the doctor knew for sure, is that if my son then said 4 or 3, he was feeling better.
Yeah.
We are a source of authority only, a source of truth only of our own experience.
Right.
So you can ask me about, if you want my reaction to stuff, Adam, I'll tell you my reaction, but me rating you, me even giving you feedback on your executive presence or your business acumen is absurdly arrogant on my part. Second, of course, me giving you advice is the oddest thing in the world. Because for you to excel at anything is going to be an emergent property of your own natural reactions and the way in which you've channeled those reactions productively. Ashley and my co-author and I were doing the audiobook. And I've done 8 of them, and he's done precisely none of them. So I thought, I'll be helpful here. I'll tell him how to do an audiobook. And so I did my audiobook. I have to read half the chapters, because there's 2 of us, obviously. And I sat him down. I said, listen, this is going to take a while. And the best way to do this is imagine you're talking through the screen to the producer right next door. It's a very intimate thing, and reading a book and hearing someone. So imagine you're just talking to them. Imagine you're just reaching through and talking to them. Ashley goes in. He comes back the next day, and he goes, I'm like, how'd it go? And he goes, it was amazing. I'm like, well, did you follow my advice? Did you talk to? He goes, no, not at all. It didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, well, what'd you do? He goes, I imagined I was sight reading the piano. He's a pianist. I'm like, you imagined you were sight reading a piano? Yeah, I realized with sight reading, you're always slightly ahead of yourself. And when you're reading your own book, you always have to be slightly ahead. The moment I realized I was sight reading, everything worked. I'm like, okay. I would never, of the 1,000 pieces of advice I was about to give him, that was 1,001. Yeah. And so that's the only point to make about feedback. How do we learn? We add more buds on existing neural branches. We don't take our own branches and insert them into your brain. And I'm not saying I'm slightly overstating the case, but we've made a god of the wrong thing. We need to make a god of individualized attention, not critical feedback. It's arrogant.
So do you think then that I don't need to be told to work on my weaknesses and that I don't need negative feedback? Because I think of, going to facts, I think of the Kluger and Denisi meta-analysis from '96, where they review a century of feedback research, and they show that whether the feedback is positive or negative is irrelevant. What matters is whether the feedback is actionable. And so part of what I worry about when you say, look, people don't really need this feedback, especially in the negative domain, is we're just kind of assuming that people are automatically defensive or they have fragile egos. And you know what? I actually believe people are stronger than that.
Yeah,
don't you?
I would too. I think people are incredibly strong, and they're at their most strong when they're standing in their strength. What I'm talking about here in terms of helping someone get better is you're leaning into the question of, well, and it's not a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, and I know we can talk about that until we're blue in the face. Very few people are going to go, you're fixed. Almost all of us have a growth mindset. The question is, where will you learn and grow the most? If you're doing something that's really stupid, I'm probably going to tell you, stop doing that.
Yeah.
But if I tell you to stop doing that, I'm going to take you from -6 to 0. If I want to take you from 0 to infinity, that is a different conversation. So, and by the way, that's a challenging conversation, Adam. Like, as you know, as a writer, your editor, they were all over your piece, right? I hope there were some parts of your book where they were like, that, I don't know, you write whole chunks like that, people will want to read stuff read stuff that you write. I mean, boy, that's so.
Yeah, I just copy-pasted that section for a whole chapter then. It's like, there you go.
But, and that's not soft. That's not like me going like this. It's me going like this. Yeah. The best coaches that any of you have ever had, yes, there may be some places where someone went, stop doing that. And that's totally legit. If you're doing something just, A, the steps are wrong, the facts are wrong, or you're just treading on your own tongue, then, okay, stop that. That's so fine. But please, when you do that, please don't imagine you're helping that person excel. You are preventing their failure, which is okay. If you want to help them excel, you are helping them to uncover what elements or aspects of them are really effective, and then helping them to refine those more effective. And you're helping them by basically going, I don't know, I can't tell you how. I can ask a series of questions. I can point out when it really works. And this isn't to make you feel better. It's to make you go, if you want to make a dent in the world, there's only one person that can make your dent, and I, as your coach or your mentor or your team member or whatever, I want you to step in and make the bloody best dent you can. That's not soft, but it's the hard prescription of excellence versus the hard prescription of remediation. Right. Those things are different. We're not careful. We have school where, frankly, a lot of what we get taught is that once you get the A, you're fine, and we need, more than 70% of parents in America will go A, F, and we focus on the F. And so we've been inculcated, and this is true around the world, we've been inculcated with the idea that the hardness, the sort of toughness, is to deal with the fact you've got an F. And actually, the toughness should be, that's an A, okay, how much more awesome, contributive, amazing, and beautiful could that be? There lies contribution. Here lies remediation. So I'm not saying this is, don't not do that. It's just that doesn't get you here. It really doesn't.
So this is really fascinating because you then complicate this idea and you say, but I don't believe people have potential.
Well, gosh, I don't say, this is a measurement issue. Listen, so lie number 7 is people have potential. It's a lie. People don't have potential. Here's how potential is played out in the world of work. Adam, you have a bucket. In the bucket is a big thing. It's called potential. And if you have a lot of potential in your bucket, we give you a name. We give him a name, don't we? We give him a name. We call him a high potential. He's a hypo. And then over here, you have a bucket too, but it maybe has a hole in it, or I don't know, something. But there's not much potential in it. You're a lopo. So you have hypos and lopos. About 15 to 20% of our company are hypos, the rest are lopos. I'm so sorry, but he's got a golden ticket. There's a thing called potential that he takes with him wherever he goes, and it somehow turbocharges everything. Well, I'll tell you, we haven't been able to measure that. Try to measure that. Go to any people analytics tool anywhere ever that can show that you can measure something in Adam that, independent of context or situation or role, is called potential, and that he has a lot of it and you have none of it. It's made up. We just made it up. We've taken a truth that's true in one small set of circumstances, namely, does Adam himself have potential to grow and get better, which is true, and then we've scaled it to everybody and turned it into a lie that all of us, maybe some of you still in university haven't bumped into this yet, but you go into any big company, there's hypos who get all the goodies, and there's everybody else who doesn't. We've created an apartheid in our companies, and it's morally, sorry to get all worked, but it's morally reprehensible. Every single human can grow and learn and get better. Everyone can. And when we cut a lazy term, for those of you in measurement, you know this, that's a lazy, prove to me that potential exists. Measure it. It's like leadership. Measure that. Yeah, best of British luck on that one. Measure leadership. You measure it one time, and I'll show you a whole bunch of leaders where all the qualities seem to be optional. It's like, no, we can, by the way, we can measure followership. So this measurement's so interesting because it pushes you to be really humble, first, I think, and precise about what are you saying. Leadership's a thing. No, followership's a thing, because we can actually measure people's willingness to give their breath to you. Okay, that's interesting. We start measuring traits of leaders. The first thing that strikes you is just how many leaders don't have them. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that actually is where I wanted to go next. So you do take on leadership as your last lie, which is especially fun because you're often described as a leadership expert. At least in the organizational psychology and organizational behavior world, one of the ways we measure leadership effectiveness is we just measure the success of the group or team that you're leading. And ideally, we get the delta, right? So we measure their performance before you came in and then after, and we look at, okay, trying to control for whatever you had before, how much did the leader move the needle? And that basically is measuring a version of followership. But would you accept that that's leadership, or do you think we should move away from that altogether?
Well, that is followership. So we have two challenges with followership. Number one, can we actually measure something in followers reliably, and then do any sort of time 1 to time 2 comparison of improvement? And can we perhaps actually show some sort of criterion related validity of the movement of that to the movement of something else that we care about? Yep. That's interesting to do. Yeah. That work is ongoing. A lot of people are trying to understand that. It's all good. Because we're measuring things that people can report on, their own experience as a team member of this person. The other aspect of that that's a little trickier, Adam, is that at the moment we have no reliable way of measuring knowledge worker performance. How weird is that today, by the way? Today, right now, when anyone says, this thing we did drives performance at the level of the individual, it's all made up. Why? Because we have no reliable way to measure knowledge worker performance, other than ratings that we know are more a reflection of the rater than the ratee. We know the idiosyncratic effect undermines the fact that your rating is a reflection of you. So anybody who's saying anything about this thing drives performance is making it up. I mean, all of your alarm bells should just go off. Having said that, we can see that performance, your level of engagement time 1 to time 2 might change. Mm-hmm. And it does make sense to infer that if we bring a new leader in and it moves, it's like, that must be a function of that leader. So followership exists. Mm-hmm. The challenge is then when we look at leaders themselves, and let's say we do a concurrent validity study, and we have a whole bunch of study group and we have a contrast group, and we try to identify And by the way, I spent the first 8 years of my career doing exactly this. How do you measure the traits, not states, the traits that exist in this group versus this group? The only thing we could ever find at Gallup, the only thing, and we must have done those concurrent validity studies, I must have done 100 myself, let alone the rest of my colleagues did. The only thing that predicted group membership was total score. It wasn't the configuration of particular traits. It was that you had some traits strongly. Okay, that's really interesting. That implies that leaders are, good ones, are idiosyncratic. And that average, by the way, and this is probably true across the board, average is homogeneous or homogeneous. Average is same. Excellence, almost in anything, is unique, is heterogeneous. And the data shows us that. In my language, when you do pre-employment selection assessments and you try to say, all the best people have all these, you actually look at the data, they don't. They have a big total score, but they've got peaks or spikes. And it's like, okay, that's annoying, because you want Richard Branson to look and act exactly the same way as Warren Buffett, but he doesn't. And you know in the real world, if you were to say to Warren, well, to grow as a leader, we've defined the leadership competencies, you're missing a bunch that Richard has. To grow, you should be more like Richard. When I say that, it sounds stupid, because it's stupid. But yet we've created a $15 billion industry that in many cases, Adam, as you know, does exactly that. That there's a leadership thing that if you could just learn it, and imbibe it, you become a leader. And there's no data on that. In fact, most of the data pushes exactly in the opposite direction.
Yeah, Marcus, I agree. And I think it's interesting because I guess at some level you could do a fuzzy set analysis and try to come up with archetypes of different models or prototypes of what a good leader looks like. But there would be a lot of them, right? And you wouldn't encourage people then to try to just become one. I think you pointed out something else interesting, though, which is there are 3 tech companies represented in the audience right now where I've started and then stalled on research projects because we wanted to measure performance, and they said, well, we can't. We don't have objective performance data. And I'm like, but you have software engineers. They write code. You can tell whether the code works or breaks. You can tell whether the code is elegant or complex. And they're like, no, not really. Our engineers all disagree about this. We can't measure it precisely. But we still have to figure out who's doing a good job and who's not in order to promote or pay people.
Yes.
What do you advise them to do instead? Because I've really been at a loss for how to navigate that.
Well, this is a longer thing than we could talk about today, but it is, if any of you are interested, like if you and I were to do a research project together, one of the things that we should absolutely tackle and then give away is how do you reliably measure knowledge worker performance in a way that doesn't, I mean, we've crunched hundreds of millions of pieces of data, ratings data, over 4 or 5 years to see whether they relate to anything. And of course, they don't relate to anything useful because they wobble all by themselves. They have no reliability to them, so they're flapping around. So no wonder flapping around here doesn't relate to anything over here because it's just all over the place. The only thing they predict, or we found that they predict, by the way, your rating this year seems, at least half of it seems to predict your rating last year. So once you're a 3, that 3 is on your back. And you walk around with it. It's hard to shake the 3. And by the way, if you're a 5, it's kind of like you can mess up a bunch more times because, hey, look, I'm a 5, So the solution probably is, and I don't have it like right here because otherwise I don't know, I would be a happy bunny. But the answer probably lies somewhere in the same way that it lies with health. Today, no one says, are you healthy? Instead, they say, what's your weight? What's your body mass index? What's your cholesterol? So health has become a sort of a daft oversimplification of something where we've broken it down into some things we can reliably measure, which lead to actions. Performance is going to be that way too. There'll be some aspects of performance where we will ask your team leader, by the way, that raises the question, who's the team leader, because there's a bunch of dynamic teams going on, but anyway, to ask a few questions, not about you, but about their reaction to you. Why would we do that? Because we're trying to make decisions about what to do with you, so why wouldn't we ask the person who's proximate to you what they would do with you? Is that performance? No, it's what I would do with, it is only what it says it is, which is a summary of what a particular team leader may feel. That then becomes one data point. You might then take code and its Darwinian strength in terms of how long it survives. As we know, that's a good way to measure the usefulness of code, whether the world sort of agrees to shove it away or go, oh, no, we'll build on that. So I think in every role, we'll have some aspect of performance that will be reliable measurement of person closest to you. Should that be peers? I know there's a bunch of apps out there where peers are going to rate each other. I think you've got a data insufficiency problem there, where I just don't bump into you enough to have any of my data points be anything other than, I like Adam, basically. But I think we're going to break performance down into a few reliably measured things. So when we design the 9 boxes of the future, it won't be performance and potential. A, potential's stupid. B, performance is stupid. Instead, we're going to have reliable measures of a few things, and then we're going to humbly say, look, Adam's strong here, he's got a bit more here, he's got, and in the book we talk about that as momentum. So people don't have potential, they have momentum, which means they've got some things about themselves they probably take with them into every situation, traits-like things, and they've got some things that probably change according to the particular part of the world they're in, their skills, their experience, their performance, state-like things. Yeah. Now, if I confer on you your low potential, that's a conversation ender. Yeah. But if I say, what's your momentum, suddenly that's a conversation starter, and we can start asking ourselves, well, what's the level of your momentum? What's the direction of your momentum? Do you want to change your momentum? Now that's an interesting, language is important. Momentum is a better word than potential.
Yeah, at some level, I think it's what every manager's job is to create.
Yes.
How do I help establish momentum for the people who work with me?
Yes.
So should we take some audience questions?
Sure.
Let's see what they are.
We want your feedback.
So Marcus, you mentioned that you're a fan of talent assessments that are reliably made and that are valid.
Yes.
What are the pitfalls that you see holding a lot of talent assessments back?
Well, and I'm sorry if I'm preaching to the choir. Some of you know this far, far better than I, but the very first thing you need to establish when you build a psychometric tool of any kind is reliability. No reliability, no anything else. So we've got to start with reliability. So the one thing I would say that does hold many of these assessments back is we haven't started by saying, what are you a reliable rater of? Whether you're the test taker answering questions about yourself, or whether you're a 360 participant completing a survey on someone else, I am only a reliable rater of my own experience. We better build tools that are based upon what we know humans are reliable raters of. I am not a reliable rater of you on anything. And that is systematic error. That's not random error. The more data points you add, as some of you know, systematic error, the more data points you add to systematic error, the bigger the error gets. You don't remove it by adding noise plus noise plus noise plus noise. Doesn't equal signal. It just makes more noise. So a lot of these talent assessments, I don't think, are starting with humbly going, what can a person reliably report on? Whether I'm reporting on my reaction to you, or whether I'm just reporting on me. You get that wrong, everything else sort of goes skewy. You get it right, you're on the beginnings of understanding what's knowable.
Another question that I think is incredibly interesting is one of the places that people do have reliable information about us that we don't have is our blind spots, right? So other people see strengths we don't recognize. They also sometimes see weaknesses that we probably do need to remediate. I know if I worked with Steve Jobs, the first conversation I would have had was about his weaknesses. What do you recommend saying to people when you do spot a blind spot?
Again, language is important. Blind spot is weirdly arrogant. A, it implies that you are seeing someone else that someone else doesn't see, and B, you're implying that it's relevant. You can only report on one thing. Obviously, people do need to be around other people, as I said, but you can only report on one thing. What's my reaction? It's like, I can't tell you that you're a logic bully. I can tell you that I felt like I couldn't make a decision. The moment I flip that, I know it seems like a small thing, but the moment I flip that, you are removed from arguing with me because you're never going to, I felt bullied. You go, oh, yes, no, I felt bullied. And that's a beautiful flip because it's like, I'm not telling you that you got a blind spot for bullying. How the hell do I know that? All I know for sure is that I felt like I couldn't make any choices and that you'd sort of logicked me into a corner.
I'm really sorry, by the way.
No, that's okay, but I'll carry it around with me for a... but it's those small things, I think, Adam, are quite important to get right.
Agreed. One more question. What do you think about the question of whether potential is measurable in some settings? So one that comes up here is athletics. Could we say that a LeBron James is a better prospect because we know he's taller, he's faster, he has more dexterity, right? There's a draft combine where you try to measure all these qualities and then translate them into some indication of potential, which I realize is noisy and limited. But as we move to more objective qualities, do you think there is some indication from a current measurement of those qualities of future potential to perform?
Well, gosh, I don't know, but it's knowable. Some of these things are knowable. If you get, all basketball players need to have almost Marfan syndrome, where they need to have that weird stretch of you're 6'7", but you play like 7'2". Okay, that's not interesting. That'd be interesting to know about a person. But then you don't get Muggsy Bogues, so then you miss that. And then you don't get Isaiah Thomas, because he didn't have that. So you lose all sorts of really cool people. Now you get LeBron, because he does have that. And you get Kobe, but you miss Kobe's steal. Like, there's a thing about Kobe that's a different thing, right? So all of these things are knowable, and I think this is why this conference is so important, because HR, we are not data fluent in HR, and a discipline it has respect based upon the quality of its data. And most of the data that we put in our HCM systems, our human capital management systems, is bogus. It is not measuring what it says, and so everything falls apart beyond that. I'm not saying when you started, or your salary, or when you were last promoted. Countable things that we put in these systems are good. But an awful lot of the stuff that is not countable begins to bleed into feedback, potential, competency lists, all that sort of stuff. And it's all rubbish. Like, from a data standpoint, it should make all of you twinge. And so this sort of a gathering like this is so important, because we want our children to come into workplaces and feel as though the whole focus on people is reliable, knowable, humble, and then valid in some way. At the moment, we're just making it up, and it means that there's no foundation. So in terms of potential, should we start going, well, what can we know about a human? That's a great question. My sister was a ballet dancer for the Royal Ballet. At 11, she had her wrists measured to measure the gap between her bones, because they didn't want to hire people at 11 who were going to be more than 5'5". Well, they measured her bones. They said the potential's good, and they brought it because they had a measurement, and they brought her in. As it turns out, she was 5'7.5", and grew too big to be a ballet dancer for the Royal Ballet Company. My point in saying that is they did have a measurement. Yeah. Now that they could go, as you know, retrospectively go back and see whether or not there was any predictive validity to what they selected for to the subsequent performance. And now we can start to add one little piece of knowledge that's reliably gathered onto another little piece of knowledge. And there lies progress, there lies wisdom, which is why this is, what you all are doing is so important.
Well, in closing, what I want to do is a very low-tech survey. Can I just have you all in the audience? Can you hold up the number of fingers for the number of times that you have been challenged or stimulated by something Marcus said this afternoon? Okay, so Marcus, I have to say, we are arbiters of that truth. This is not an idiosyncratic Rader effect. You lived up to those strengths. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.